Hey guys, Ben from Buck Photography here, and today we are looking at a bridal fashion shoot I did with Rose Bradley, a model who is signed to Callow Models. And we did this in a national park on a really drab and dreary day, but we actually managed to get some pretty summery, warm looking images at the end of it. So today I'm going to be going through how I took the photos, the posing, the equipment that I used, some lighting techniques, and then also some post-production stuff as well. But not only that, I'm going to tell you guys that this is a really great way if you're looking at getting into wedding photography to get yourself a portfolio. So instead of trying to go for booking weddings straight away, it might be worth just getting in touch with a few models and saying, hey, I'd love to organize a bridal shoot with you. We can both use the photos. Nothing costs money from either end, so I'm not charging you, you're not charging me. We'll go out for the full day and we'll take a whole bunch of really awesome wedding style photos, organize a dress, organize hair, organize makeup, and you'll get yourself a whole bunch of really awesome wedding style photos that you can put in your portfolio and advertise and start getting real clients for real weddings. Anyway, back to the shoot. The gear I used for this photo shoot was a Sony a7R II coupled with a Sigma MC11 adapter so that I could use Canon glass on my Sony camera, and a Sigma 50mm f1.4, the non-art version. Now normally I only talk about one photo from each photo shoot that I do in a YouTube video, but this time I'm going to go with two photos, and let me know in the comments if you prefer the one photo approach or if you like me doing two photos per video. So here's the first photo we're going to look at today, and here is the photo before it's been edited. So because it had just been raining and it was a really dark and cloudy day, I thought the best thing to do to make the image brighter and more colourful and just as warm and summery as possible is to find some colour around the place. And the most colourful thing I could find was this yellow wattle tree that was in full bloom, and I thought that would be perfect because yellow is a really warm colour. The greens, I can make them look really warm as well in post-production. So this is the first place we went to get some shots. Now, as you can see in this photo, there are yellow wattle flowers on the left of her, on the bottom right, and on the top right. Now, what we actually did for this shoot is I held some yellow wattles to the right, to my left, to her right, with my hand, because there wasn't really enough wattles to encapsulate all around her, and there was a bit of empty space on my left of her. So I just grabbed a bit off of the tree and put it right next to her and then started taking some shots. Now for this shoot, I pretty much didn't offer any posing advice to Rose. She was a very experienced model, so she already knew pretty well what she was doing and how to make herself look as best as possible. And every person has particular poses that they feel are complementary to their body type and to their facial features. And I think this photo is a really good example because her head is tilted slightly to the side so you can see her cheekbones as well as her jawline, and then her contorting herself just slightly really accentuates her long and thin arms and torso. So now we're just going to jump into Photoshop and start looking at the editing process I used to create this image. We'll smash through this so it doesn't get boring. The first thing I did was added some vibrance and clarity to the entire image just to make the whole scene pop. Then I dropped the whites down a little bit just to make the image a bit more flat. And that might sound a bit of a strange thing to do, but I think that it smooths the skin tones out quite nicely as well. So that's the reason I dropped it a little bit. The next thing I did was I used the brush tool and smashed the blacks and the exposures down all the way just so I could see the selection I was grabbing with this tool, and I pretty much just highlighted all of the hair on Rose's head. So after making the selection, I just messed around with the saturation and the color balance of Rose's hair until I got a nice bold color that I thought suited the color balance of the entire image. The next thing I did was, again, got the brush tool and put the exposures and blacks all the way down so I could use the brush as a selection tool, and I just selected all the parts of Rose's skin that I wanted to make a bit smoother. Not because her skin wasn't smooth, but it just makes her skin even smoother than it was originally, which makes the skin more aesthetically pleasing in my opinion. So here I'm just making a selection of all the parts of the skin that I wish to make smoother, so making sure that I don't make the lips and eyes more smooth because they're the things that should be bold and pop out of the image, because eyes generally in portraits should be the focus of the image. And then once I've taken all the selections, so the forehead, the cheeks underneath the lips, a little bit above the lips, and on the nose, making sure that you don't get any of the hard lines of the face as well, like the jawline and parts of the nose. I then reduced the clarity just 30 or 40 points. And not only did I do it to the face, but I also did it to the neck and both of Rose's arms and her chest as well. Now when you're editing the smoothness of the skin using this particular technique, you don't have to be super accurate with where you're selecting, just as long as you don't go crazy with where you're selecting to reduce clarity, because if you reduce clarity over contrasting areas, it's going to smooth everything together and make your subject not pop out quite as much. So the next thing I edited was Rose's eyes, just made them a little bit brighter and added a little bit of clarity as well to make them stand out a little bit more. Now, on hindsight, it would have been really nice if I'd had a reflector with me so I could reflect some of the sun's light onto Rose's face and really make her eyes brighter without having to edit it in Photoshop, but didn't have a reflector with me at the time, nor did I have an assistant to hold it for me. And while I'm here, shout out to Sigma for making a super sharp lens. Everyone's always going on about the Sigma 50mm 1.4 art lens, but if you look here, the non-art lens is super sharp. Anyway, the next thing I did was just brighten up Rose's right hand because it was underneath the tree's branches, so the sun wasn't able to illuminate it quite as much as her face or her left arm. So what I did was just added a little bit of exposure to her arm, adjusted the color balance with a bit of extra yellow just because the shaded area was more blue than the highlighted area, and that's all I really had to do with her arm to make it look the same exposure and color as her other arm. So that's everything I did in Camera Raw. Now let's jump into Photoshop and we're going to do some blemish removal on her face. All the blemish removal I did today was with the patch tool, and there really wasn't that much to clean up, so it only took me about 45 to 60 seconds to do all the blemish removal. So here's the final image, I hope you like it. Let's move on to the second image I'm showing you today. So here's the second image that we're going to look at today. It was shot at an aperture of f1.6 with a shutter speed of 1/160th of a second and an ISO of 125. So this photo was taken during the end of our photo shoot, and the sun had just popped out from the clouds and was giving us some really harsh light into the scene, and it was causing some really unpleasing highlights and shadows on the model. So what we did was we decided to hop into the shade and try to find somewhere that was completely shaded without any spots of harsh light coming through. And this is the area that we found. It was just next to a gum tree, actually two gum trees, and I really like how you can see sort of a line of gum tree leaves coming on the left of her. So anyway, let's hop into Photoshop and see how we edited this photo. Okay, so the first thing we did was add a little bit of clarity to the entire image, just to make her pop out from the background a bit more. Then I noticed that the color balance was a bit off, so I changed the whole scene to be a bit more yellow. I found that the Sony A7R II's white balance isn't perfect. The next thing I did was add some vibrance to the entire scene just to make the greens and yellows of the trees pop. Then I dropped the highlights very slightly just to make the harsh whites on her face a little bit less harsh and smooth the skin out. Next thing I did was I tried to remove some of the magenta purples from her skin, and I was a bit unsuccessful with this, so I just dropped the purples down slightly to get rid of any purple fringing in her eyes. The next step was to make Rose's hair brighter, so I used the exposure and blacks brush to make a selection of the area that I wanted to make more colourful. Then I just highlighted all of her hair, and this only took maybe about somewhere between 45 and 60 seconds. Then I removed the blacks and the exposure and then upped the warmth of the image with the magentas and yellows and added a whole bunch of saturation as well. And this was really just to accentuate the bright orange colour of Rose's hair, which I thought was really awesome. So the next thing I did was just added a little bit more exposure and clarity to Rose's eyes, and this was just to draw a bit more focus to her eyes, because being a portrait, I feel that the eyes are one of the most important parts of the image and they really need to stand out and be a focus point in the image. So just making a selection of the eyes and then adding some clarity and exposure. So the next step was skin. First thing I did before that, actually, forget skin, the next thing I did was make the irises a little bit brighter using the saturation tool. After I did that, then I worked on the skin. So the way I worked on the skin was just reset my brush there, and then did the same thing I did with the hair, pretty much just boosted the blacks and exposures all the way down so I could make a selection of the places I wanted to change. And once I'd made a selection of her forehead, her arm, back, cheeks and her nose. From there, what I did was just remove the blacks and exposure change and reduce the clarity to make her skin smoother. And this isn't the only thing we did to make her skin smoother, but it's the first thing I always do. You've just got to make sure that you don't boost the clarity too low or her skin will look unrealistically smooth. The next thing I did was boost the greens and the yellows in the scene, just to make the foliage of the entire image a little bit more bright, vibrant and warm. Because it was such a cold and wintry day, everything was just looking a little bit sad and a little bit dull. So I decided to boost the yellows and greens and just make the whole image a little bit more yellow as well, just to really make the scene feel a little bit more warm. And finally, the last thing I did was smooth out Rose's skin with the patch tool. Now, there was a big patch of skin on her forehead that was a little bit bumpy, so instead of using the patch tool on every single little dot and blemish she had, I decided to use a technique called frequency separation to smooth out the skin. And the way you do this is you make a big selection of the place you want to smooth out, you go filter, blur, Gaussian blur, add a couple of pixels, click OK, and that smooths out the entire piece of skin using blur. So I just did that technique in a few different places to smooth out the skin. Just like with clarity, you don't want to do this too much or it'll make your model's skin too unrealistically smooth, and that is undesirable. And that pretty much completes the editing process of this image. Here is the final image. I really hope you like it. Please leave a like if you enjoyed the video, and I'd also love to hear in the comments what you would do to either of these images to make it better. I'm sure there are lots of things that could be done to improve the image. Once again, thank you for watching. Please feel free to subscribe if you like this content. I'm going to be producing a lot more in the future. I'm also going to leave the raw files of this image in Dropbox and then link it underneath. Feel free to edit these files as you wish. And once again, thank you for watching.